Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Manga and it's been a hot minute since I've done a video game review. And what better way to dive back into the world of game analysis than to talk about the newest hit Sonic game that found its way onto the market, Sonic X Shadow Generations, or as I'm going to call it for the rest of this video, Sonato Generations. If you found this video from another means, then shame on you. It feels like ever since the release of Sonic Frontiers, Sega decided to dust off their old edgy gear and finally embrace their inner cringe after having trapped themselves under so much irony for far too long. With this game, Dark Beginnings, and the upcoming third Sonic movie involving our favorite Edgy the Hedgy, the era of edgy sincerity is upon us. And with this new game, so too does the continuation of Forces/Frontiers as gameplay commence, taking this franchise into more unique and further heights. Also, Sonic Generations is back, so that's pretty neat too. For just a quick rundown of my history with Generations, it was one of the first Sonic games that I ever played. And in the past, when my childhood self had loads of whimsy and thought of Sonic to be flawless, even when I was playing objectively terrible stuff from him, I had a blast with Generations, fondly going back to it every now and again. On my old channel Manga Artist, I even ranked Generations as being my second favorite Sonic game of all time, putting it behind Unleashed and in front of Rush Adventure. Then a few years ago, I ended up buying and playing the Steam version of the game, and while I wasn't as ecstatic about the entry than I was in 2011, even finding it to be a little harder than I remembered it being when I was younger, I still had a very pleasant time. Now, after beating the game for what feels like the 6th or 7th time at this point, my overall thoughts on Generations has pretty much remained the same. I still really like it. Granted, I was playing with a busted controller and an old laptop, so my playthrough was a little less than ideal, but despite all the setbacks, I still got hit with the same charm, sincerity, and general lighthearted fun that made this anniversary game such a good time. So, when I found out that this game was going to be playable alongside the new Shadow entry, I was pretty excited, because even if Shadow turned out to be a disappointment, I would still have the same Generations that I already loved to bits. So if Edgy the Hedgy didn't impress me, I could always have Generations as a backup game. Then I watched the cutscenes that got leaked, and let's just say I have thoughts to give. So what I think would be the best way to talk about Sonato Generations' improvements and failures was to go back and play the OG game. Not 100% mind you, but just complete the story mode, so that I can have a solid foundation to work off of with this new version. Now that I've beaten the story of both versions of the game, I will be doing this review in a side-by-side kind of format, starting with the story and cutscenes, then moving on to gameplay, and to other things if I find them to be worth mentioning. Then once I'm all done with Generations, I will be reviewing Shadow Generations in a completely different video. Because trust me, that game is an entirely different beast. If you're here because you just want to hear that part of the review because you don't really care about Generations, then sorry, you're gonna have to wait. Stick around though, I feel like this video is gonna be pretty good. So, with all that said, let's compare and contrast the two versions of Sonic Generations to determine which one is better, and if there really is a definitive way to experience this game. Sonic Generations, in wanting to be sure that it wasn't rehashing a game that is over 10 years old now, decided that the cutscenes from the original story should be changed up slightly to give the adventure some added flair and identity. Sonic and Tails now say different dialogue during the game's cutscenes, and the characters you save have their newer voices saying the lines with some added tweaks. Modern Sonic even responds to his friends this time around, whereas in the original he stayed silent like his classic counterpart, which got a few chuckles out of me the first time I played it. But alas, this is the new canon story. These are the changes that Sega thought were important to make to this game to make it the ultimate experience. And these changes...
So, I have a question for you. Once we're home, you think the timeline will be restored? Yep. Just don't think about it too hard.
You ruined it. You ruined it and I'm leaving.
Yeah, they aren't the best. And I feel the best way to highlight these problems would be to go through each cutscene and point out where Sonato Generations went wrong. The first cutscene where the changes can be truly seen is where Sonic attends his birthday party and Amy attempts to kiss him. And to avoid the sickly embrace of love, Sonic puts his hand to her face and keeps her away. In the original game, this interaction was treated as an everyday gag in which the characters are used to this being a part of Amy's charm. Sonic knows exactly how to handle this by just not giving her any attention, with no one paying this attempt at affection any kind of mind. Now I know that there's some people in this fandom that see this joke as a bit problematic, since Sonic holding Amy back by her face is a bit rude and the fact that no one tells him to stop can be seen as a bit mean. But I feel that the game's tone does not make this action out to be anything out of the ordinary. Sonic and Amy have done this whole spiel for many years at this point, and Sonic knows that just putting his hand out and waiting for Amy to calm down will work just fine. He's not doing anything intentionally to hurt her, he's not doing anything cruel, he's just enforcing his boundaries and Amy eventually stops. A simple, harmless little joke that calls back to their long-lasting dynamic, and it got a little laugh out of me and maybe some others in the audience. In Sonato Generations, the cutscene plays like normal, but when we get to the shot of Sonic holding Amy back, the scene was reanimated to where Amy just idly stands by with some cupcakes in her hands, staring at nothing as the void seems to have consumed her soul, and she's thinking about where all of her character has gone since the Boom era. You can see more proof of this inside the game itself, where if you go to the Room of Solitude in the hub world, Amy's passage goes from this in the original: Amy Rose, a young, cheerful girl hedgehog. Amy can be a bit obsessed about chasing Sonic. She even claims to be his girlfriend. She's an energetic go-getter who lets nothing get in her way. To this: Amy Rose, a cheerful girl who loves to help others. Sonic inspired her to be her very best. She's an energetic go-getter. With the help of her Pico Pico hammer and fortune cards, nothing gets in her way. Yeah, let's just say that I'm not the biggest fan of this change, and here's why. First and foremost, I find Sega's relentless crusade on making Amy's character independent from Sonic to be a bit annoying. Look, I understand that times are different and a girl chasing after a boy is something that you just don't really see anymore, but this rewriting of history so that Amy is written to be only inspired by Sonic and was never heads over heels for him in the past, to be something that makes Amy feel like she's a flanderized version of her past self. Amy used to really like Sonic. That was a big part of who she was as a character, and her growing out of this crush as years went on was a totally fine character arc for her to go down, don't get me wrong. But Sonato Generations, rather than just acknowledging this past and trying to build up on it, decides to take that core part of her character out entirely and goes on to mention her fortune cards, which, I'm sorry, is the absolute worst addition to her character. Why is Sega so insistent on this being a thing now? It feels so tacky. And my second gripe with this change was that it feels unnatural, because in the earlier shots of this cutscene, Amy was still attempting to kiss Sonic, and then when we see her again, she's doing something completely different. In the original, the animation made sense, the writing had some flow to it, which made the joke's original punchline work so well. But in the remake, Amy just looks like she had a fucking stroke and just suddenly decided to do something completely different off-screen. If they went through the effort to animate her with cupcakes, why didn't they just reanimate the scene of her very clearly trying to hug and kiss Sonic? Because they didn't, this change just looks so unnatural. But alas, the cutscene proceeds with all the boys getting kidnapped, and Sonic's cheesy line is changed to being all about his friends, because... oh, okay, what was wrong with the original line? And once we save Tails and Sonic says a completely pointless line in the remake, a familiar scene plays, but has a completely different tone. In the original, Sonic and Tails have a quick discussion about the level they were just in, and due to them not being in Green Hill for years at this point, the memories of the place are quite hazy for them. Sonic drops a quick line in pretty much the only time where the references are quite on the nose, and he bolts off towards Chemical Plant, where Classic Sonic pops in looking all cute and cuddly. I just gotta say, I really like how Classic Sonic looks. He's adorable. In the remake, however, Sonic and Tails are now aware that the level they were in was in fact Green Hill. Tails even referring to Green Hill as not being South Island, a term that Sonic fans may or may not get depending on how deep into the lore you are. The cutscene continues with the dialogue being slightly different from the original, and already I am starting to see one of the big issues with this remake, and the best way to highlight it would be to play certain parts of this cutscene. Watch these cutscenes back to back, and see if you can find the problem.
Is it me, or is that place we were just in awfully familiar?
Is it just me, or does Green Hill look different?
Not to me. This place looks like something sucked all the life and color out of it. Totally strange. This isn't South Island, and all the color and life's been drained from it. Totally strange.
No stranger than rescuing genies in magic books or saving aliens in an interstellar amusement park. I'm more concerned about finding our friends.
no stranger than fighting evil genies or saving aliens in an interstellar amusement park. Right now, we should focus on finding our friends.
That might be a good place to check out. I'll be back soon.
Well, that's as good a lead as any, Tails. Back in a flash.
Wow, you weren't kidding when you said soon. I thought you already left. Wow, that was crazy, Sonic. You weren't kidding. It's like you never left.
Did you get it? Well, to those who didn't, the redubbing of these cutscenes is just not good. At all. Sonic Generations had the fortune of the animations matching the voice lines because they were done around the time the game was being animated. But in Sonato Generations, the voice actors, with all of this new dialogue to say, do not have that advantage. And with some of the very strange choices in words and some sentences being way too long, a lot of the lines from the remake sound rushed and very awkwardly paced. This strange dubbing over the old cutscenes results in what I can best describe as watching an old anime dub, where characters speak like there was no room in the sentences, meaning that they can't properly inflect their lines. And in turn, the game suffers from having these very weird and awkward pauses in the animations, because the visuals were clearly animated with different dialogue in mind. An easy change to this would have been to just reanimate all the cutscenes from the ground up. That way the lines can sound more natural and the animation can look better. But I'm guessing that they just kind of rushed this because they worked so hard on the shadow stuff and just kind of ran out of budget and just did whatever they could. Whatever the justification was to redubbing these cutscenes, this cutscene was not a good start. And believe me, it's only gonna get worse from here. After the two Sonics speed through Chemical Plant and get PTSD from pink water, the cutscene with Tails and Sonic chatting in the plant begins. In the original, this was a nice little scene that continued to play on the character's faulty memories, but remembering small details here and there. Despite being concerned about his friends, Sonic can't help but feel a sense of deja vu from the time he spent in this level, adding on to the mystery of the game's story. In the remake, however, this cutscene is done way worse, with Tails knowing for an absolute fact that they are in Chemical Plant, bringing up West Side Island again for no fucking reason besides reference, and Sonic, rather than showing even the most bare-boned sense of intrigue of why Chemical Plant seems familiar to him, instead just brushes it off and says that they must find their friends, something he already did in the previous cutscene, so this statement feels worthless. I will be holding off on a more elaborate point later, but just for a little teaser for now, my guys, can you at least try to get involved in your own plot? Come on, have some fun, please. Is that too much to ask? After this, Amy is at last saved, and when in the original she showed her usual affection towards both Sonics, even complimenting classic Sonic's looks and asked what he does to make himself look so young, in the remake she only compliments classic Sonic's looks, and in the modern version she just says that she hopes to return the favor. This is an line that doesn't have anywhere near the staying power as OG Amy, but the cutscene ends with Sonic responding with another nothing line. And from what he says just makes me question if his line was written as a response to what the original Amy said, because that makes far more sense. Seriously, listen to this.
You saved me, Sonic. I was afraid I'd never be able to flirt with you again.
Not really worrying about that right now, Amy.
Do you see what I mean? It's just very weird. Fortunately, we get to Knuckles' rescue scenes, and the cutscene is kept rather intact from the previous game, with a change being made towards classic Sonic.
Thanks, Sonic. Now then, tell me, where is the rest of my island?
You really are a fat bastard.
Which, okay, I will admit, that was an alright joke. Can't just fat shame him, but this'll do, I guess. Once we get past the cutscene of the two Sonics playing copycat and classic Sonic rushes off to beat Eggman, showing off the remake's really bad dubbing problems from this line.
Take a good look at yourself, Sonic.
Dr. Eggman!
It's the last thing you'll see in this world.
Classic Sonic beats the Death Egg within an inch of its life. Pretty happy with that time. And here's where the remake declares that it took the story of Sonic Generations and tossed it in the bin. Rather than it being a strange occurrence for the Time Eater to kidnap Eggman like it was in the original, the remake decided that it would be a good idea to go ahead and tell you that it is in fact Dr. Robotnik that was the one piloting the Death Egg, and he was the one who got snatched up by the Time Eater, and not modern Eggman. What the fuck, game? Now, in case you haven't played Generations in a while, having the game show you that it's Robotnik at this point in the story raises two major problems. For one, this change ruins the original game's twist of there being a classic Eggman. A twist that, while not the best thing ever put to film, was still a very solid and welcome surprise that helped to recontextualize the game's early story. To take what was probably the most shocking part of the OG game and completely spoil the surprise this early on is nothing short of baffling. And two, because of this add-on, it changes the entire narrative of the game going forward. With this reveal, the story now has to rewrite itself with the knowledge that Robotnik is a thing way too early, which makes not only one or two lines from the game sound off, but just makes the final confrontation feel so much less impactful and intimidating. God, I remember the days when I thought this game's plot was too simple, and yet here I am praising it like it's gold because the remake got it so fundamentally wrong. Thank you, Remake, for making me realize I took way too many things for granted. OG Generations played with the fact that classic Sonic never actually saw which Eggman was kidnapped, and that was why Robotnik was never a concept until the end, making the twist so effective because you saw it and went, oh, of course, that makes so much sense. But here, they just gave it away. Why did they think it was okay to change it to this? Moving on from this absolutely stupid change, classic Sonic makes it out of the portal and modern Sonic gets a truly good look at his past self, and the Tails come in to help figure things out. Just going to say right now, the remake doesn't explain how classic Tails became a thing, he just pops into existence like in the original. How'd he get here? Don't question it. In Sonic Generations, this was one of my favorite cutscenes in the whole game. Seeing both Sonics being so bewildered and yet curious at there being two of them in the same room, the Tails swooping in to show that they helped one another figure out what was currently happening, revealing what happened to the two clueless blue blurs, and then going on to theorize the Time Eater's role in all of this, made this cutscene a very nice bridge towards the next part of the game. Nothing groundbreaking by any means, but it served its function very well. It was a way to help answer one question while also raising many more that makes the player want to carry on so that they can get to the bottom of this conflict. So how did the remake do it? Well, the cutscene is off to a very good start by making Sonic go from realizing and accepting this crazy reality of the situation, to just giving classic Sonic a pat on the back, stroking his own ego.
Huh. Couldn't have done it better myself.
You ruined it.
You did not have to do that. You knew you did not have to do that. How could you have done that? Can you live with yourself?
Someone better call Scooby-Doo, because fuck me, the mystery has just vanished from this plot. Why did they get rid of Sonic's acceptance of there being another one of him? That was such a good landing point from the last cutscene, because in that one he was shocked and had no time to process anything because everything happened too fast. It makes all the sense in the world that he would take a second to let his eyes take in this mind-blowing reality. It was really cool to see Sonic, for once in his life, completely stumped for words. But Son Out of Generations, for some godforsaken reason, just doesn't allow any of that. Was it really that bad that Sonic doesn't remember much from the original game? Was it really so bad that he didn't just immediately accept the current situation and have no concerns or questions? Was it bad that he was shocked at seeing a past version of himself? My god, what is this mess of a story? Then, after Tails and Tails give them the rundown of the situation, rather than asking how any of this happened, which is a very reasonable and natural question to ask given the circumstances, Sonic just now says,
Without the time stones?
Get it? Sonic referenced the time stones, because reference. He isn't allowed to continue to be shocked by the fact that there's another him in the room or question how any of this happened. No, we gotta have a reference. He just thinks it's odd that they can time travel because they don't have any time stones, which if you didn't pick it up is a subtle reference to the 1993 Sonic platformer Sonic CD for the Sega CD, which came out as a canonical prequel to Sonic the Hedgehog released in 1991, where in the game you travel through time to get 7 of these stones by robbing the burning corpse of aliens, by the way. Wasn't that such a subtle reference to give to Sonic's past and totally was completely irrelevant to the storyline? What are you talking about? Guys, Give Generations its plot back. My goodness, what did this game ever do to you? As we go further along in the game, we have, to the game's credit, less obnoxious changes to the dialogue spouted by Sonic's friends. The only real differences being that modern Sonic says the audible equivalent to,
You did great, kiddo!
a nothing burger, and after hearing Charmy go from sounding like a boy to a girl,
Was very scary, but being with you makes it all better. Yeah!
That was very scary, but being with you makes it all better. Yeah!
The fuck is that?
we get to the game's climax. After beating the Egg Dragoon, Eggman throws a fit, Sonic taunts him, and the Time Eater captures Eggman, leaving all the boys with a confusion on what the Time Eater's role is in the original, making you hyped to go and fight it. But in the remake, because Robotnik has been established to be a thing already, the game has to remind itself through some very clunky dialogue and very strange changes to Sonic's roasts. Seriously, Sonic's cockiness is both neutered and exaggerated in places where they shouldn't be, leaving this scene with having nowhere near the amount of intrigue as the OG game. Mystery is just dead to this adaptation, I swear to God. The only thing that's left is that we don't know that Eggman is controlling the Time Eater. But alas, we power on through, put the hopefully real Chaos Emeralds into place, don't worry, that joke will make sense in the next video, and the Sonics get their final confrontation with the Time Eater, who was in fact controlled by both Eggmen all along. In case you aren't seeing my very clearly obvious bias before towards the original game, this cutscene from the 2011 game was easily the highlight of Sonic Generations for me. Before the fight even starts, Sonic spits a jab at the monster, saying a line that is so perfectly in character for him that I don't see any reason to change it. And with that declaration, we get the Eggman reveals. Not only did we get that cool reveal of Eggman being the one controlling the Time Eater, and the fact that Robotnik is a thing in this world, which makes the Time Eater a much bigger threat than before, having Eggman be such a spiteful bastard that he is willing to destroy time itself to get a win, and still have the nerve to belittle his past self like he's any better, is some classic Eggman stuff that I look back at with so much fondness. His interactions with Robotnik, while they were very short, were very endearing, and were a very nice way to call back to Eggman's sheer ego and zaniness, only giving out compliments when they benefit him. Even the whole part of Sonic's friends cheering his lifeless corpse on to get back up and go Super Saiyan was something that has that lovely cheese to it. Man, why did I ever think this was dumb? We really had it good back then. So with this very good cutscene, Sonato Generations saw this scene, saw all the memes it spawned after a decade, and then went, hey, here's an idea. Let's make it worse. Sonic's snarky little jab is turned into a word salad, Robotnik's reveal is ruined because of reasons you're tired of hearing at this point, Eggman brings up his interstellar amusement park because the game wants to remind everyone that Generations takes place after Colors, Eggman's plan sounds far less personal and comes off as a more generic bad guy with time powers, Robotnik calls himself a dirty queer, Eggman doesn't belittle Robotnik anywhere near as much and instead talks like they're on equal footing, both Sonics fight the Time Eater and die along with my soul, and the friends cheer him on in performances that sound like there was no direction whatsoever.
You face worse, Sonic!
Focus your spirit.
We're right behind you. I believe in you, Mr. Sonic.
Michelle Ruff, fuck me, I hope anime is paying you well. And this is where I will finally talk about another massive problem with this game's cutscenes. The voice acting is so much worse. Now listen, I completely understand that it has been at least 10 years since the original game came out. These voice actors have had 10 years of doing not just Sonic, but all kinds of different voice acting gigs that have changed and altered their voices in ways they cannot control. And with age, there comes this natural decrease in ability to give energy to your voice. And with natural aging combined with Sega's very inconsistent voice direction, the downgrade of the acting range in this game is so blatant. Lots of the characters sound like they're struggling to keep the voices they had a long time ago, and from this, the performances that were once perfectly good in the original are now more reserved, slow, and subdued, which is way more obvious when you put it over animation that clearly had more energetic voices in mind. Eggman and classic Tails are the prime examples of the voice actors just not having the ability to do the voices as well as they used to, which makes watching some cutscenes involving their characters feel far less fun to watch. Seriously, Mike Pollock sounds so tired that in the new version, they just reused his laugh from the old game. Don't believe me? Listen. Guys, just... why did you even bother? You could have just left this game alone. And the final cutscene, when the Time Eater is defeated and the boys are back to their party, the game decides that one more change could help tie this remake into a handsome little bow, where they changed Amy's push to Knuckles after he teases Sonic a little. In the original, this was just a cartoony gag that played with the lore of Amy being way stronger than she looks, adding some charmful heart to the ending. And in the remake, the push only nudges Knuckles a few feet, ruining what was probably one of the better jokes from the original. Aside from the fact that they kept in one of the sound effects that made the last game's joke so endearing, making this one just feel shallow in comparison, the reaction from the Sonics just do not match the scene and just looks weird, proving once again that Sega should have just reanimated all the cutscenes from the ground up, rather than just randomly splicing up some old scenes and adding in their tacky changes. But alas, right before we get to the charming ending, Sonata Generations makes a couple more changes to the script. Number one is the conversation between the two Tails, where originally they ask a question that I'm sure every Sonic fan has asked at least once, which makes their interaction extremely cute, to then just talking about timeline bullshit, because heaven forbid Tails talks about anything other than technology and timelines, where modern Tails accidentally says the quiet part out loud.
Once we're home, you think the timeline will be restored? Yep. Just don't think about it too hard.
Fuck you, game. And number two is that the Sonics have what was originally a nice little chat to having the greatest example of the dialogue not matching the scene, resulting in the worst dubbing of the whole game.
It was great teaming up with you, or me. Maybe this will fast track you to learning some new tricks in the future. Wait, I mean, past. Ugh, time travel's a chore.
Jesus heavenly Christ, what was that? And there you go. That was a thorough side-by-side comparison of the Generations storyline. Anyone who says this is the best way to experience this game's story is just straight up lying to you. Also, Rouge doesn't show off her tits that much and has some changes to her back, because Sega just loves to continue their spree of pointless fucking changes. Now before we go on, let's have a tiny little discussion about Sonata Generations' identity. Is this game a remaster or a remake? My opinion is that while the fundamental gameplay is the exact same as before with just some minor tweaks, don't worry, I'll be talking about that later, the changes to the plot are so clear and obvious that to call this a simple remaster of a 10-plus-year-old game with just some minor tweaks would be a complete lie. These plots are not even remotely comparable in terms of execution, making this game, from my perspective anyway, a remake. And here's where I begin my proper critique of this port's storyline. The biggest reason why I find these changes in Generations to be so bad is not only did they feel unnecessary and made so many lines of dialogue feel out of place and poorly delivered, but the changes that they made the game feel like it had lost so much of its original character and charm. The point of the original story was that it was a mystery. Sonic and Tails had no idea what was going on, and from going through the highlights of their past lives and meeting up with their original counterparts, does the story start to make sense to them. Throughout the game, they know about the Time Eater through its actions, but they have no idea how Eggman is involved until the very end. Is it a simple story? Yes. Does it feel strange that Sonic and Tails wouldn't immediately remember their past adventures from a meta sense? Yes. But just because you can make something dumb from a meta perspective, that doesn't make the original story inherently bad. The mystery was one of the driving points of Generations' plot, and to have Sonato's version take the initial mystery that was built up throughout the game, completely take it out, and replace it with the characters understanding that they are indeed going through past levels, constantly calling back to past adventures immediately, and giving away all the twists in the first fucking boss, just ruined what made Generations a charming and fun experience. Even if one could argue that Sonic and Tails being hazy on the details about past levels is a dumb thing from the original game, because how could they forget? At least it showed that the sheer number of adventures these guys went on was something that was acknowledged and played with for at least a little while. Seeing Sonic and Tails get deja vu from seeing old locations, watching the two Tails figure it out, and having the two Sonics be genuinely flabbergasted at the revelation that there is two of them and that they're traveling through time, were events that, while one could see it as dumb and even a little funny, were still quite charming and cute. Having the Sonics rediscover the highlights of their past was something that made the whole adventure feel special, like the Sonics were learning everything along with the player. Through its mystery, the game was able to entice you. But in Sonato Generations, the story was so meta and so boldly assuming that you played the original game just yesterday that it feels like it was butchered and even abridged. There's no chance for the player to get involved in the plot because the writers, for some asinine reason, just decided that because a lot of fans already know the plot of Generations, that made it a-okay for them to ruin the twists and turns that made the original memorable. I'm sorry that I keep harping on this point, but it was cool to see that Eggman was working with his past self. It was a nice little twist that very few thought about beforehand, and yet it made perfect sense. But the remake looked at this and decided to go, nah, you already knew this from the game you played 10 years ago, so we're just gonna speed things along and show them earlier because, you know, fuck Generations. You want to get to Shadow ASAP, we know why you're here. Sega, if you're willing to remake one of your most successful games, why did you then treat the original story with such disrespect? Fuck me, Generations had such a simple storyline, and yet somehow, somewhere along the lines, you thought it was a good idea to fuck up the story this badly. This feels insulting. Speaking of the characters being aware of everything to the exact detail because screw this game's narrative, let's talk about the references.
Is it just me, or does Green Hill look different?
This isn't South Island. This is definitely the chemical plant. But we're not remotely on West Side Island.
Without the time stones?
After Sonic ruined my interstellar amusement park,
I have a question. For God. Why?
They're awful. They're bad. They're forced. Don't you even try to use the excuse of this being an anniversary game. Don't even bother. It's just bad. It does not justify bad writing. Working alongside the writers of this story is Ian Flynn, who is now the head writer of Sonic going forward. And look, I know to some fans of Ian's writing that it can be very annoying to see him constantly be made fun of for how many times he references past titles, but I'm sorry, the mockery this time around, yeah, it's completely deserved. Because not only are the references one that feel like they are only there to bring up something that will make someone pull a Leonardo DiCaprio, but they also just sound completely unnatural to the conversation certain characters are having. Why would Sonic even bother bringing up the time stones? Why would Tails even bother bringing up South or West Side Island? Please stop calling back to other titles and just write a plot, Ian. Oh, fuck. Now I know that there are some people that might have heard me rag on the new cutscenes for at least 30 minutes at this point, and say that I'm just nitpicking and that I'm being too harsh. The changes are so minuscule, writer, why do you care? It doesn't affect the game whatsoever, so why get mad at Sega and Ian Flynn for changing up some dialogue and a few animations? You still have the game, right? The game's still good. Isn't that why you bought it? Well, the two answers that I have to these questions are simple. Number one, just because Sonic games are not known for their stories does not mean that Sega can just retcon and change up their narratives all willy-nilly and not expect to get some pushback from fans of the original game. Shadow Generation springboarded off this game, treat it with some respect at least. And number two, If the changes were that minuscule, and that they don't really matter, as you say, then why did Sega bother making them? Why couldn't they just leave the original game alone and focus on the shadow portion, leaving both fans happy with this port? Wouldn't it have been just way cheaper to just have the OG games as cutscenes and not re-record any of the lines, like how they did with the Sonic Colors port? Did they have to because of copyright issues? Is that a thing when it comes to remakes? Like, fuck, I don't know. Why did Sega think that it was necessary to tweak Generations' story when there was nothing wrong with it before? The point that I am trying to make when I ask you these questions is to give you a simple remark. If Sega can care enough to make these changes, then why can't I? It's not my fault that they decided to butcher their own story and greenlit Ian's rewrites for no fucking reason. What happened, Sega? Seriously. What the fuck happened? So, that was just the story part. I've been talking about the narrative of this game so much that I nearly forgot I was talking about a video game, and with that comes gameplay, the thing that you probably care about the most. If you skip to this chapter, I swear to God. So, what was it like? Like the story, comparing the two versions of the game is the best way to go about highlighting where this game went right, and yeah, where this game went right. I can say that with my whole chest that in terms of gameplay standards, Sonata Generations took the masterpiece that was the original game and made it even better. Yeah, you probably weren't expecting that, were you? Yeah, this is where the video is going to get a lot more positive because I actually really fucking liked this game. So let me show you why. When I was playing through the original Generations, one thing that I found in the Steam port was that this version was very clunky. The overall experience I had with the original game was that I ran into a lot of performance issues, ranging from frame rate drops, glitchy sound effects that didn't play, and sometimes the game just not even responding to my controller inputs, even if I could argue that it was just down to my controller being old. While I enjoyed it, it was overall not the ideal experience than the one I had with the Xbox version in the past, which I remember having no problems with at all. So, with my version of old Generations being this rough around the edges, considering the fact that my laptop is very old, and that Sonata Generations was a game that was made in the 2024th year of our Lord, let's just say that I was very worried about how the game was going to run in general. I downloaded this game completely expecting the worst, and then the game was fine. In fact, aside from loading times that were a bit long and sometimes the load up screens being a bit wonky in their frame rates, the actual game itself ran like warm butter, which was an absolute shock to me. One of the biggest reasons for this, I think, was the whole option the game had to lower the graphics settings, which is done far greater and more detailed than OG Generations. No longer did I have to do the changes on a small window and then hope to God the game would run fine once I booted it up. Now I can just go to the options menu, fiddle with the graphics, and boom, the game runs perfectly, making the speed and flow of Sonata Generations as good as the Xbox version of Generations from so long ago. And what's better is that even on its lowest settings, the game still looks amazing. It still has the very detailed backgrounds, the energetic scenery, and the very quick and tight action set pieces that were very easy on the eyes. Visually, this game is stellar. They put in so much effort. In terms of the game's controls, I had an unfortunate mishap when I played it the first time and found out that the controls were completely different from the original game. I can't show you that footage unfortunately because my recording software decided that a black screen was poor engaging and I only found out after I beat the game. I'm a great video game reviewer, I swear. Sonata Generations' default controls are the ones that came from Sonic Mania for Classic, and a combination of Sonic Forces and Sonic Frontiers for Modern, which came as a very big shock to me and are control styles that, for Generations, I'm personally not a big fan of. I was expecting this to be a not-so-pleasant experience. However, my fears of being forced to adapt to this new gameplay style was vanquished, because when I went back to the options menu, the game gives you 3 options of control style: Standard, which is the new way, Legacy, which is the Generation style, and Custom, where you can customize your controls to suit your own preferences. This simple add-on was a godsend. It is a perfectly good way to give fans of the different kinds of games exactly what they want, and it made the rest of my playthrough smooth sailing and very enjoyable, with the drift mechanic being slightly tweaked to be tighter and more responsive than before. One other ability that was added into the game was the drop dash, where with the holding of a button will make Sonic hit the ground and dash off with a boost of speed, a move that was implemented for the first time into Sonic Mania. When I heard that this was going to be a mechanic, I was skeptical. I didn't really see how adding this ability into Generations would help make it any better, since the levels were never originally designed with this move in mind. However, once I played around with it and I saw just how good it added to the pacing of the levels, I found myself using this move more and more as I kept playing. I personally added it to the jump button where it activates after a homing attack for Modern, and as strange as it sounds, it eventually felt natural to pull off by the end. As for Classic, however, I didn't really use it much. I'm sorry, that spin dash is just S tier. Now, some of you might be a little bit concerned. What if the drop dash isn't your thing? What if this add-on could ruin your experience, and will make you not want to get the game? Well, the good news is that this move isn't permanent. It's actually a custom move that you have from the start. Just a quick correction mid-script, it is permanent for Modern. I even tried customizing Modern Sonic to get rid of the drop dash, but I can't. I do not know why the drop dash is permanent for Modern. I will never understand that. If you ever want to get rid of it, you can just go to the item customization, go to your ability sheets, and take it out for something else, the drop dash taking up 30 out of the 100 points. While I personally would have had the drop dash be something you would unlock after a few levels instead of adding it on without any kind of warning, once the shock of it being there was over, I found the drop dash to be a very good add-on to this game's already very fast gameplay, adding more experimentation and skill to my playthroughs, making the levels infinitely more fun. As for the base game itself, if you have played Generations to death like I have, you get everything you want here. The levels are exactly the same size and length, all of the red rings are in the same places as before, rival battles are not changed at all, and the challenges are still as easy and challenging than they were in the original, with one more added feature. Along with bell notes, new abilities, and red rings, the new collectible that Sonata Generations introduces are the Chow. Each level has 3 Chow for you to collect, and like the red rings, these little fellas are hidden in areas that require you to think a little outside of the box in order to find them. There are 6 Chow in each world, adding up to a total of 54 Chow for you to find, with the hiding places they occupy getting tougher as the game goes on, adding so much more replay value to the levels as you're now playing them completely differently. As someone who was able to get most of the red rings fairly easily without using any guides, I found this new challenge to be very rewarding and a very good addition to the game. Depending on how good you are, these guys will supply you with at least an extra 1 to 2 hours of playtime, which I think is great. Overall, to say that Sonata Generations improved on the old gameplay would be an understatement. With its tight controls, faithfulness to the old game while also adding in new content for new and old players alike, Sonata Generations turned an 8 out of 10 game into a 9 out of 10. And in that sense, it was truly fantastic. When I wasn't seething and mauling over the story, I was thoroughly enjoying myself going through Sonic Generations another time, with this experience being definitely the best of all the ones prior, gameplay-wise. Sonata Generations took 1 step back, and then took 2 steps forward. All in all, good fucking soup. So with all of this said and done, do I think that Sonata Generations is the definitive way to play Sonic Generations, making the original obsolete in comparison? Well, if you made it this far, you know that my answer is yes and no. While I appreciate that the game gave us another run of an already solid Sonic title with just better performance and new content added into the gameplay, I found the absolute neutering of the original Generations' heart and character and replacing it with these pointless changes to be very bad and just unnecessary. Everything from the sanitizing of certain characters, the constant reminders that we're playing an anniversary game, the removal and changing of very basic and harmless jokes, to the all-around inferior voice acting, Sayonara Generations, from a storytelling standpoint, comes nowhere near to holding a candle to the original, and I greatly preferred the past game's story over this. This game cared enough to make these fixes, and because of it, I feel that it's very fair to give this game criticism for missing the mark and ultimately just not getting the appeal of the game it was remaking. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the past game, and Sayonara Generations could have had a chance in being the one true way to play this game, if they just didn't give in to making changes that were unnecessary at best and insulting at worst. I do not approve of this rewriting of Sonic's lore and having Sega treat this as being the canon version of Generations going forward. It's a concerning practice that makes me wary of any kind of remakes or remasters Sega will try and make in the future, because with all the tweaks and changes they made to Generations, a story that was absolutely harmless and as bare bone as you can get, I see now that respecting the original stories is something that will likely not happen. My god, could you imagine if they remade Adventure? This is also a case where I believe that both Ian Flynn and Sega are to blame for the outcome. Ian can say that Sega wanted this all he wants, and fans can bring up his podcast where he discusses the mandates he's under whenever he's met with questions about his bad writing for the upteenth time. But at the end of the day, Ian is still the head writer. He has a job to make quality Sonic content, and to do all of this pointless stuff to Generations was not a good look. I know that you can do better, Ian. I just want to see some evidence. But overall, the Sonic portion of Sayonara Generations, to me, is a mixed bag. If you're just here for gameplay and don't give a damn about story, then this game is going to be a blast for you. And in that sense, it is factually the true version of Generations. That I cannot deny. It provides you with the same experience for new fans, and old fans get some new stuff that is more than interesting enough to make it worth their time. However, if you were looking for another trip down memory lane for Generations and don't care enough about Shadow to pay the full price, then playing the original Generations and waiting for a price drop is gonna do you just fine. Keep your copy of the original and play Sayonara Generations for the new stuff. After all, that was its main selling point. So it's completely fair for me to say that you can just give it what it deserves. My name is Manga Writer, and in the next video, I'll be taking a deep dive into Shadow Generations, because believe you me, I have a lot of thoughts on that game as well. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.